This is the Year 8 Adaptation and Inheritance Reverse the Classroom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through lots of words, lots of kind of diagrams, right, that will really help you if you understand and have a pretty good grasp of for when you actually get into the unit properly in class. Okay, this is our snaky diagram. So we've got to talk about competition, predator-prey, adaptation, natural selection, evolutionary trees, extinction, variation, bit more variation, and inheritance, obviously ending up then with a test at the end. Now, competition. These are good things, right, just for you to have a bit of a picture in your head about, right? It's competition. What animals do is animals compete for four main things. They'll compete for food, water, shelter and territory, and mates. So think about a lion. A lion will compete for food, water, the territory, and a mate. Right? And that's pretty much what all animals do. Plants compete for water, light, water, nutrients, and space. So what they are is they're very, very similar. But obviously what you don't have in a plant, you don't have a mate. Right? So they are four different things that animals and plants compete for. Some words. Extinction. Extinction is where no members at all survive from a species. So, for example, the dodo. And it's often due to extreme things like geological events, like when the dinosaurs got wiped out, disease, climate change, habitat, or hunting by humans. So pretty much the dodos were hunted to extreme by humans, and there's also things like dogs and rats and cats that got involved in it as well. Another word that's on here is evolution. Evolution is the process by which living things can gradually change over time. Right? So even the human population, humans are gradually getting taller, right, over years and years and years. Now this is a predator-prey graph. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to go into a loads of detail, right? But what you've got to do at the bottom is you've got to look at the year. This side here says the number of rabbits. This side here says the number of foxes. And you've got to look at a graph and you've got to look for patterns. So if I've got this here, which is the number of foxes, this is the number of rabbits, look for the pattern. As the amount of rabbits goes up, the number of foxes goes up. If all of a sudden the number of rabbits shoots down, what's going to happen with the fox population? The fox population is also going to go down. So if you do get a graph like that, right, you've got to look for the patterns. And the same thing happens here. The number of rabbits, all of a sudden, for some reason, absolutely plummets. Right, look at that there. The number of rabbits there plummets down to there in 1996. So therefore, the foxes have got no food. So all the foxes die as well. And that's a predator-prey graph. Now, adaptations. Now, what I've got on here is I've got some very, very detailed slides on adaptations for hot environments. And then there'll be another one in a minute for cold. So what I've got here, we've got animals. Animals that live in hot environments have a large body and thin legs. Think about a camel. They've got wide feet, so they can walk on the sand. Think about a camel. Small amounts of very concentrated urine, right? I'm sure camels have got very concentrated urine. I've never looked, but I guess camels have probably got very small dry feces. They don't sweat because that would just be a ridiculous waste of water. Large ears. Now, even though camels aren't nocturnal, so nocturnal means that they kind of stay in bed all day and then get up at night, right? A bit like sort of 17 and 18-year-olds, right? They're nocturnal because then it is more kind of manageable during the day to survive. They have thin hair and eyelashes. Camels have very long eyelashes to stop sand getting in. The camel's hump is full of fat, and they have a hard mouth. Plants, what they do is they are very shallow, but have very widespread root systems. Spines for protection, no flowers, thick waxy layer covering the plant, because you've got to remember that the waxy layer on a plant is to stop heat water loss rather than keep it waterproof. A thick stem like a cactus and can often be tall. In cold environments, right, think about a polar bear. Right, what shall I do it in? I'll do it in blue. No, I won't do it in blue. I'll do it in orange. Polar bear, thick white fur. Right, so the thick fur is to keep them warm. The white fur is then to keep them camouflaged. Hollow fur, right, that is then to keep the heat in better. Large feet to walk on the sand, not much sand in the cold places, to walk on the snow. Small ears, because you lose heat through your ears, that's why elephants have big ears, to lose heat. Large body, short legs. Greasy fur to keep them waterproof. Layer of blubber is the fat, and a long snout. Plants living in very cold environments tend to be very small, grow in clumps, are dark coloured. Leaves are covered in a waxy layer and hairs. They have very deep roots to make sure that they can get to the water, and they have antifreeze sap, because obviously if it goes down to minus 10 degrees, you don't really want it freezing dead easily. Now here, what I've then got is I've got extremophiles. I love the word extremophiles, right? The phile bit kind of means like, and extreme is extreme, right? So that is then when an animal lives or likes living in an extreme environment. There's two on here. This first one here, right, looks incredibly scary, and that's a fish that lives very, very deep in the oceans, right? And what it is it's able and it's adapted to be able to cope with enormous pressure, very cold water, right? And if they're actually brought up to the surface, because they're not used to the pressure, what they actually do is they actually swell up and potentially even explode. The black smoker bacteria live in deep oceans, 2,500 meters down, at temperatures well over 100 degrees C. This is then where they're coming out of little hot vents around volcanoes. So an extremophile is a living organism that lives in extreme environments. Now, extinction, right? I can't remember the exact fact. I've read it somewhere that something like 99% of all animals that ever lived are extinct, because that kind of involves the dinosaurs and things like that. Now, that fact may well not be true, but there's lots and lots and lots of different reasons why animals become extinct. Okay? Number one, climate. If the climate changes, habitats change, animals could become extinct. Number two, better adapted. So what I'm doing is I'm just looking around them here, better adapted. Okay, so an animal that is better adapted to the environment, like the grey squirrel can come in, it's more aggressive, it's bigger, it can get to the food better. What it can then do, it could ultimately make the red squirrels, even though it hasn't happened yet, extinct. The disease, right? If there is a really, really, really bad disease that comes out, it could wipe out an entire species. Humans will just come along and they'll just kill everything, because that's what humans are then like. This is then human predation, and there is a dodo. Number 5 is lack of food. If you've got an animal that lives in the middle of the desert, right, and that food substance that they eat all the time then starts to disappear, they could all disappear as well. Pollution, I'm not going to write, well, I'll just write down pollution there. Pollution could make an animal extinct. Lack of genetic diversity. Invasive species like rats going into Australia or rabbits going into Australia, what they could do is they could cause extinction of other animals that are in there. Loss of habitat, orangutans living in Indonesia and places like that, their habitats are getting chopped down, eventually they could become extinct. So there are lots and lots of ways in which animals can actually become extinct. Right, evolution, we've got Charles Darwin, right, amazing. Right, what he did is he came up with the theory of the evolution by natural selection. And what that really means is, it means an individual organism within a particular species show a range of variation of characteristics. Right, so what you can do is you can think about a lion, right? In the lion population, there is a variation, a variety of different characteristics. The lion that survives is the one most suited to its environment. So if you've got a lion that's kind of a little tiny one, and you've got a really, really big lion, the big lion is more likely to survive, and if it survives, then it's more likely to breed. And when it does breed, it passes its genes on to the next generation. So then what you'll do is you'll get gradually bigger and bigger lions. Now, Charles Darwin, he published a book on evolution by naturally, and it's called The Origin of the Species in 1859. Now, when it was originally brought out, it was kind of sort of shunned, right? Only over time was it actually accepted. And the main challenge of it was the fact that everybody believed that God had created everything. Evolution kind of goes against that, and then that depends on kind of your religious base about what you believe. More on evolution, right? We've just talked about Darwin, and so what happens with Darwin is giraffes is kind of the best example. If you've got a giraffe with a long neck, what it's going to do, it's going to be able to eat the highest food, so it's more likely to survive. So if that giraffe's got a long neck, it'll then have longer necked babies, right? And so it's kind of the fittest, the most adapted then is the one that then survives. Lamarck, right, he came up with another theory, right, which I think is absolutely brilliant. Okay, he came up with the idea that if a giraffe keeps on having to stretch to get leaves, its neck will get longer. And if it then stretches enough, its neck gets longer, it'll then have babies with the inherited stretched neck. All right, now I said before it's brilliant, right? It's brilliant because of the way it's thinking, but obviously it isn't true, right? It's not like I could do something where I make my neck longer, right? Maybe hand some bricks off my head or something like that, make my neck longer, and then my kids would then have an extra long neck because I've been dangling bricks off my neck, right? It doesn't quite work like that, right? But in an exam, they might talk about Lamarckism. Speciation, right? What speciation is, it is where a species is isolated enough that it becomes too different from the original species. So what I've got here is I've got a bird, which is the founder species. Within populations, one starts to develop a curved beak and one starts to develop a strong long beak. Eventually what happens is they become so different that they become a different species altogether. And that is then called speciation. And theoretically, kind of one of the definitions of a species is the fact that if something is of the same species, it can reproduce. As soon as it becomes different enough, it would then not be able to reproduce, and then it would not be of the same species. Right, here's another good example of kind of evolution. On this first diagram here, right, there are two peppered moths. Now obviously you've got that one there, and you've got that one there, which isn't quite as obvious. Then, on the other diagram, we've also got two peppered moths. We've got that one there, and we've also got that one there. Right, and that is then talking about the different sort of the pollution levels, and it shows evolution within a relatively short period of time. So if you've got bark that is light and it isn't very polluted, the lighter coloured moth survives. If you've got bark on a tree that is darker because of pollution, the dark moth survives because it's not eaten by the local birds. Now, this is then an evolutionary diagram, right? And what it is, it's an evolutionary tree, right, that shows kind of the progress or the speciation within a different sort of population of animals. So if we start here, oh, I don't want white anymore, do I? If we start here, what happens is speciation happens. One species goes that way, and one species becomes a plastic duck, which is really quite cool. Then, when it gets to here, certain birds then become so diverse, what they do is they then speciate. And we go to here, and then we go to here. At this point here, two sets of birds, like a pigeon and a parakeet, get so different that they then speciate, and then you have pigeons as a species and parakeet as a species. And what it then means is they cannot reproduce between each other. And looking at this, penguins and flamingos, it looks like they were actually relatively closely related, but obviously they are then two different species. Now what we can talk about is we can talk about variation. Variation comes in two forms. It can be inherited or it can be environmental. And what the inherited one means, it means the genes from your parents, and the environmental is then kind of the environment that then you've been living in. So for example, I've got two identical twins, right? One gets shipped off to the Antarctic, one gets shipped off to, I don't know, Preston. Then the difference is that genetically they're identical, but if they're in the Antarctic, they might not eat as well. They won't get exposed to sun. So what they might be thinner and they'd be paler. Where in Preston, they might have a bad diet and they might be bigger and they'll be darker because what they've got is they've got exposed to more sunlight. Now, there are 4 supposedly truly inherited characteristics: natural eye colour, natural hair colour, blood group, and inherited diseases. So they are the things that are totally and utterly 100% inherited from your parents. Down this side here are other possible characteristics that are inherited, but they kind of might be a bit of a combination between genetic and environmental. So for example, hair colour, good diet, hair length, age, right? All these different ones that go down here are possible other inherited factors with a bit of an addition of environmental in there as well. Structure of DNA. DNA is kind of the building blocks. It's what makes us actually happen. It's found in the nucleus of a cell. Right? And what it is, it's made up of 2 strands of DNA that form a double helix. So it's a bit like a spring with another spring running alongside it. So that's terrible. Okay, that's what DNA is. Right, what it is, it's a double helix. Now the questions. What are the 4 truly inherited characteristics? I want 4 answers. What is speciation? What is Lamarckism? What 4 things do plants compete for? And what is the shape of DNA? Now, what you've got to do on this one is there's lots and lots of words. You know, not just talking about at and the, we're talking about things like Lamarckism, Darwin, speciation. What you've got to do is you've got to know the words and you've got to know exactly what their meanings.